He rescued 2 little girls from a dumpster, now they call him Dad. What began as a moment of impulse became the most life-changing decision of his billionaire life. Before we get started, leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from so we can say hello to you. Now, on to the story. The golden afternoon light bled through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of the 57th floor boardroom at Whitmore Capital, casting long shadows across polished marble and chrome. From his place at the head of the table, Jackson Whitmore stood like a general surveying his battlefield, his expression unreadable, his posture a study in poised dominance. At 44, Jackson was the kind of man the world called untouchable. With a net worth north of $10 billion, he had reshaped financial markets, swallowed rivals whole, and built an empire that made Forbes covers feel like afterthoughts. But as the final slide of the Davis acquisition presentation faded from the giant screen behind him, and a hush settled over the room, something else filled the space, something colder. "Gentlemen, that concludes our business," Jackson said, his voice smooth and commanding. "The Davis acquisition proceeds tomorrow." Chairs scraped as his executive team rose, murmuring congratulations and exchanging knowing glances. Most left quickly, eager to ride the afterglow of another Whitmore victory. But Carter Lane lingered. Carter, once Jackson's closest friend and now his most formidable competitor, adjusted his Italian silk tie with slow, calculated grace. His smile was polite, too polite. "Impressive, as always, Jack," Carter said, his voice laced with just enough charm to sharpen the sting beneath. "Another company absorbed into your machine. Another notch for the Whitmore legacy." Jackson nodded curtly, gathering his notes. "But tell me," Carter continued, stepping closer, "is buying another firm really what you need? That mansion of yours must feel awfully quiet these days." The words hit like a sucker punch. Jackson paused, jaw tightening. "My personal life is none of your concern." "Of course not," Carter replied, smiling again. "Just an observation from an old friend." With a final pat on Jackson's shoulder, Carter turned and strode out of the boardroom, leaving behind a silence heavy with subtext. Jackson's knuckles whitened around his leather folder. He hated that Carter still knew exactly where to strike. He was right. The mansion was quiet. Too quiet. Each wing, a testament to opulence, sat frozen like a museum display. Custom Italian chandeliers, original artwork, smart home automation, he had spared no expense. But there was no warmth. No life. Just space. Just silence. A perfect echo chamber for the questions he never let himself ask. "Sir," came the voice of Patricia, his assistant, breaking the tension. "James will have the car ready downstairs." Jackson didn't answer right away. He closed his folder with slow precision, inhaled deeply, and pushed back his chair. 30 minutes later, his Aston Martin DB11, silver and pristine, slid through the rain-slicked streets of downtown Los Angeles. The world outside blurred beneath a windshield misted with drizzle. Billboards flashed. Horns honked. People bustled under umbrellas. But inside the car, it was just him, surrounded by quiet leather and custom wood panels, insulated from the world he had conquered. He drove himself today. Told James to take the evening off. He needed the road. It was one of the few things that still gave him any peace. The hum of the engine, the way the city dissolved beneath his tires. It reminded him of control. Of motion. Of a life not yet defined by its emptiness. His phone buzzed beside him, another message from his estate manager. Renovation updates. More decisions about a house that felt less like home and more like a museum of success. With a muttered curse, Jackson powered off the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. That's when the engine sputtered. Then died. A sharp, mechanical cough, and silence. Jackson coasted to a stop, pulling over near the edge of a rundown neighborhood he hadn't meant to enter. Perfect, he muttered, rain beginning to tap against the windshield like tiny fists. He leaned back against the seat, eyes closed. Then something caught his attention. A flash of movement through the rain. A rusted old pickup truck skidding to a stop. A man stumbling out. And two tiny figures in the passenger seat. Jackson sat up straighter, brows furrowing. Was that? He blinked, leaned forward, and froze. It was children. Small. Soaked. And the man was dragging them. Toward a dumpster. Something cold gripped Jackson's chest. He wasn't sure what was about to happen. But something told him, in that instant, that his life was about to change forever. The storm rolled in faster than Jackson Whitmore expected, casting a gray veil over Los Angeles as his Aston Martin glided through the city's rain-slicked streets. He had dismissed James, his usual driver, hours ago, some part of him needing the solitude. Driving helped him think. Or rather, it helped him feel less trapped by the titanium grip of his corporate persona. With the windshield wipers swiping furiously, Jackson veered off his usual route, avoiding construction near his estate. He found himself cruising through a dilapidated part of East LA, a neighborhood he hadn't seen since his early days, before the billions, before the boardrooms, before the Armani suits. A sharp cough from the engine broke his focus. Then, a sputter. Then silence. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, coasting to the curb under the flickering yellow light of a crooked street lamp. Steam hissed from under the hood as the car came to a halt. He grabbed his phone to call James but hesitated, then called anyway. "I'm on my way, sir." 20 minutes, James assured. Jackson sighed, tossing the phone into the passenger seat. Rain hammered the windshield as if trying to break through to him. He leaned back in his seat, letting the quiet hum of the storm numb his thoughts. But then he saw it. A battered, rusted pickup truck swerved into view about 50 yards ahead, its tires screeching as it jerked to a stop near a dumpster. Through the rain-streaked glass, Jackson squinted, his pulse quickening. The driver stumbled out, mid-40s, unshaven, reeking of instability even from a distance. The man yanked open the passenger door and dragged out two small figures, twins, by the look of it, no older than 6, clad in soaked pink jackets. One of them cried out, a sharp, high-pitched sound that cut through the storm like glass on concrete. "What the hell?" Jackson whispered, disbelief freezing him in place. The man grunted something unintelligible and, with horrifying casualness, hoisted one of the girls into his arms and tossed her into the dumpster. Her scream was short and swallowed by the thunder. Jackson's heart stopped. His stomach turned. When the man reached for the second girl, her tiny feet kicking, her mouth open in a silent scream, something in Jackson snapped. He flung open the car door, not caring that rain immediately soaked his custom suit or that he was stepping into unknown danger. "Hey," he roared, boots splashing into a puddle as he ran toward the scene. "Stop." The man turned, eyes bloodshot and wild, his expression contorted in a drunken sneer. "Mind your own business, rich boy," he slurred, shoving the second child toward the dumpster. Jackson didn't think, he just moved. But the man was faster than his wobbling state suggested. He stumbled back into his truck, slammed the door, and roared off into the storm, tires spinning as he disappeared down the darkened street. Breathing hard, Jackson stopped beside the dumpster, chest heaving. For a second, all he could hear was the rain and his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. Then a soft sound. A whimper. He stepped closer, leaned over the edge, and saw them. Two identical faces stared up at him, dirt-smudged, tear-streaked, and completely silent, as if too shocked to speak. Their arms wrapped tightly around each other, trembling. Jackson swallowed hard. Something inside him cracked. Not in the polished, business-savvy way he made deals, but in the raw, human part of him he'd long kept locked away. "It's okay," he said gently, his voice hoarse. "I see you. I'm going to help you." Rain hammered the cracked pavement, pooling in dark, glistening puddles as thunder rumbled somewhere above the Los Angeles skyline. Jackson Whitmore stood motionless beside the overflowing dumpster, his heart thudding louder than the storm. His Armani suit clung to his frame, soaked straight through, but he didn't care. Not now. Inside the metal bin, barely visible beneath torn garbage bags and broken boxes, were two tiny figures, huddled, shivering, and staring up at him with wide, terrified eyes. The streetlight flickered above them, briefly illuminating their faces. Identical. Pale. Smudged with dirt and streaked with rainwater. One girl had a small scrape on her cheek. The other clutched her sister's sleeve as if letting go would mean vanishing completely. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. What kind of man dumps children like trash? He had just watched that drunk, broken creature, the one who'd slurred curses and spat on the sidewalk, hoist the first little girl into this dumpster like she was a piece of junk. And the second one? She'd screamed until her voice cracked, kicking and clawing as she was thrown in after her sister. It had taken every ounce of Jackson's control not to chase the man down and drag him out of that truck. But instinct told him to stay. To focus on the girls. Now they were his only concern. It's okay," Jackson said softly, his voice trembling for the first time in years. "I'm not gonna hurt you. I promise." One of the girls let out a whimper, flinching back as he leaned over the rim of the dumpster. The other clutched her harder. Their jackets, both bubblegum pink, were drenched, their hair plastered to their foreheads. Their shoes, soaked through, sat in a puddle of rainwater and something that looked like motor oil. The stink of the trash didn't even register anymore. Jackson reached a hand down slowly. "You're safe now. I swear it." The smaller of the two stared at his hand, then at his face. Her lips trembled. Please," she whispered, barely audible over the rain. "Don't leave us." Something inside Jackson shattered. It wasn't just the fear in her voice. It was the way she said "us," like their entire world had already narrowed down to one another. Alone together. Left behind. "I won't," he said, kneeling in the alley's grimy puddles without hesitation. His knees hit the wet asphalt with a slap, and his expensive dress shoes squelched in the runoff. "Not ever." He gently scooped the first girl out of the dumpster. Her little body was light as air but stiff from cold and fear. She didn't speak again, just buried her face in his soaked shoulder and clung like her life depended on it. Her sister looked frozen, eyes wide, body locked in place. Jackson set the first girl down and stretched his arms back toward the dumpster. "I've got you," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. "You don't have to be scared anymore." The second girl hesitated, then, slowly, she reached out with trembling hands. The moment their skin touched, something electric passed between them. Not fear. Not shock. Something else. Something that made Jackson's eyes sting. He lifted her into his arms, holding her close. Standing there in the rain with one twin in each arm, Jackson looked down at their matching tear-streaked faces and realized something terrifying. He wasn't just rescuing these girls. They were saving him, too. From the emptiness. From the silence that echoed in his mansion every night. From the legacy he'd built on numbers and names but never love. "My name's Jackson," he murmured, his voice thick with something he couldn't name. "And I think we just found each other for a reason." Neither girl spoke. But the way they clung to him told him everything he needed to know. They weren't trash. They were treasure. And he would never let them be discarded again. The Bentley's headlights cut through the pouring rain as it rolled past the wrought iron gates of the Whitmore estate. Towering above the Hollywood Hills, the sprawling mansion had been featured in architectural magazines for its elegance and excess. Marble columns, fountains lit from below, and walls of glass framed by manicured gardens, it was built to impress, not to welcome. Until tonight. James, Jackson Whitmore's longtime driver and assistant, pulled the car to a stop beneath the front portico. He stepped out quickly, umbrella in hand, but froze when he saw what waited in the back seat. 2 small girls. Soggy, shivering, and wrapped in emergency thermal blankets. "Sir?" James asked hesitantly, his gaze darting between Jackson and the twins. "They're staying," Jackson said, more to himself than anyone else. "For now." James swallowed his questions and opened the car door. Inside, Lila clutched her sister Lucy's hand tightly. Their identical faces looked ghostly pale beneath the overhead lights, eyes wide and wary. They didn't move until Jackson leaned in. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here." He reached out a hand. Lucy hesitated, then slowly allowed him to help her out. Lila followed with a cautious glance behind her, as if expecting the drunk man to reappear at any moment. Jackson led them inside. The double doors swung open into the grand foyer, where the glow of a massive chandelier reflected off the polished marble floors. The warmth inside was immediate, but it didn't touch the chill still clinging to the girls. They stood together beneath the glittering light, their feet leaving tiny wet footprints on the stone. Mrs. Delaney, the housekeeper, stepped forward, her professional composure faltering at the sight of them. "Mr. Whitmore," she said slowly, eyebrows rising as she took in the drenched, dirt-streaked children. "These are Lila and Lucy," Jackson said, his voice unusually firm. "They'll be staying here tonight. Please prepare the guest room, 2 beds. And we'll need clothes, food, whatever children their age need. I don't know, just help me." For a moment, Mrs. Delaney said nothing. Then she nodded briskly and turned on her heel, already giving instructions to the staff through her earpiece. The twins hadn't moved. Their eyes were fixed on everything around them, the gold-framed paintings, the towering staircase, the flickering fireplace in the adjacent sitting room. Lila's voice broke the silence, quiet and unsure. "Is this a hotel?" Jackson smiled faintly, kneeling despite the puddle soaking into his Italian slacks. "No. It's just my house." Lucy blinked. "It's really big. Are there other kids here?" "No," he said honestly. "It's just me." "That's kind of sad," Lila murmured, her head tilting as she studied him. Jackson blinked, caught off guard. He didn't know how to respond. Sad? He'd never thought about it. He had fortune, fame, influence. But in that moment, standing in the vast, echoing hall with 2 orphan children who had just been thrown away like trash, he understood exactly what she meant. Mrs. Delaney returned quickly. "The room's being prepared. I've sent for some temporary clothes and something warm to eat. Bath's being drawn now." "Thank you," Jackson replied, rising again. Lila and Lucy stood uncertainly at the foot of the stairs. "You can come with me," Mrs. Delaney offered gently, holding out a hand. "We'll get you warm and clean." They hesitated, then slowly followed her. At the top of the staircase, Lucy turned back and looked at Jackson. Her voice was small, almost drowned by the soft patter of rain against the windows. "You're not going to send us away tomorrow, are you?" Jackson's throat tightened. "No," he said, louder than he meant to. Then, more softly, "Not tomorrow. Not until we figure this out." She nodded, and disappeared down the hall with her sister. And just like that, Jackson Whitmore, the man who had built an empire alone, was no longer the only soul living in that house. For the first time in years, it felt less like a mansion. And a little more like home. The mansion had never been this quiet, yet never this alive. Jackson Whitmore stood in the doorway of the guest bedroom, still in his rain-drenched tailored shirt, watching the 2 small figures curled up together in the massive bed. The cream-colored duvet, which once matched the sterile elegance of the room, now cradled 2 fragile lives that had been discarded like trash only hours earlier. Lila and Lucy had showered and changed into oversized t-shirts that Jackson's housekeeper, Mrs. Delaney, had hastily repurposed into makeshift pajamas. Their blonde hair, still damp, clung to their cheeks. The chandelier's soft light above them cast golden halos around their heads, like two angels dropped into the ruins of a world that had never protected them. He didn't know what he was doing. The man who had once negotiated billion-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat now stood paralyzed by two tiny bodies in a guest room. Everything in this space had once signified status: the Italian linens, the imported wallpaper, the art hanging opposite the fireplace. But none of it mattered now. Not in the presence of innocence and pain so raw it pulsed through the walls. Jackson stepped inside slowly, unsure whether to speak or simply stand guard. The twins stirred. Lucy's voice broke the silence first. Barely a whisper. "Are you gonna leave us here?" Jackson's chest tightened. "No," he said softly. "I'm staying right here." Lila shifted beside her sister, eyes blinking open, blue, wide, still swimming with the remnants of tears. "Is this just for tonight?" she asked, her tone hesitant. "Or are you gonna send us back tomorrow?" Jackson crouched down beside the bed, one knee resting on the hardwood floor. He didn't flinch as his Italian slacks soaked in a small puddle of rainwater. "Not tomorrow," he said after a beat, his voice cracking despite his efforts. "Not until we figure this out. Together." The word together seemed to hang in the air longer than any other word he had spoken in weeks. There was silence, thick, uncertain. And then Lucy asked the question that nearly shattered him. "Do people really keep kids they find in dumpsters?" Jackson didn't answer immediately. He stared at them, two 6-year-old girls, abandoned by the one man who should have fought to protect them. They were asking not whether they'd be loved, but whether they'd even be kept. His voice, when it came, was raw. "I don't know what kind of people do that," he whispered. "But I know I'm not letting you go." A pause. Then Lila reached out a tiny hand, resting it atop his. "You're not like him," she said simply. "You saw us." Jackson swallowed the lump rising in his throat. His entire life had been built on being seen, his face in Forbes, his quotes in the Wall Street Journal. But for the first time in decades, it wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing them. "Get some sleep," he said, brushing hair from Lucy's forehead with unexpected tenderness. "You're safe now. That's all that matters tonight." The twins didn't answer. They didn't need to. As Jackson stood and turned to leave, Lucy's voice stopped him again. "Mr. Whitmore?" He turned. "Do we get to have dreams here?" He nodded slowly, feeling tears sting the back of his eyes. "Yes. As many as you want." Then he closed the door gently behind him, leaned against the hallway wall, and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. For the first time in his life, Jackson Whitmore, billionaire, strategist, Wall Street legend, had no plan. Just two girls. And a promise not to fail them. Not again. Not ever. The morning sun filtered weakly through the wide bay windows of the Whitmore estate, casting soft golden light over the marble floors. Jackson sat at the breakfast island, watching Lila and Lucy eat their cereal in silence. Every so often, Lucy would glance up at him, quick, curious, cautious, while Lila stayed glued to her sister's side, eyes wary and distant. Their faces still carried the shadows of fear, and even beneath warm pajamas and fresh sheets, the weight of abandonment clung to them like a second skin. Jackson stirred his untouched coffee. He couldn't stop thinking about what they had said the night before, about their dad leaving them because they were too expensive. The words had haunted his dreams, dragging him back to a place he hadn't visited in decades. He'd been 5 when his own father walked out. 7 by the time his mother passed from complications of a surgery they couldn't afford. After that, it had been a carousel of group homes, temporary foster families, and strangers who saw him as just another mouth to feed, not a child to care for. Jackson snapped out of the memory as Mrs. Delaney entered the kitchen, her voice soft. "The girls seem calmer this morning, sir." He nodded. "Thanks to you." But calm wasn't enough. Not for what they'd been through. Not when someone had discarded them like trash. He stood and crossed the kitchen to his private study, closing the double doors behind him. A wall of screens flickered to life with a touch of a button. Jackson hit speed dial on a secure line. "Max, it's Jackson." "Morning, sir," replied Max Tilden, head of Whitmore Security. "I need a deep dive," Jackson said, pacing in front of the fireplace. "Two girls. 6 years old. Names are Lila Grace and Lucy Hope. No last name yet. I want everything: birth certificates, medical records, school history, CPS reports, everything. And find out who the hell that man was who dumped them. I want to know his name, where he lives, what he eats for breakfast." "Understood," Max said instantly. "Timeline?" "Yesterday." There was a pause. "I'll start now." Jackson hung up and stared out the window. Below, the garden looked peaceful, lemon trees just beginning to bloom, sunlight dancing on the fountain's surface. But inside, he boiled. No child should ever have to look up from a dumpster. No one should ever be discarded because they weren't convenient. 2 hours later, Max called back. "We ID'd them. The girls are Lila Grace and Lucy Hope Baird. Born in Torrance, California. Mother's name, Melissa Baird, passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. Medical records confirm she fought hard but lost after a prolonged battle. No siblings, no listed next of kin." Jackson's throat tightened. "The father?" "Travis Baird. Age 42. Lives off unemployment and odd jobs. Arrest record: 3 counts of public intoxication, 2 petty thefts, 1 domestic disturbance. No current employment. He's bounced addresses 3 times in the last year. Looks like CPS has an open file, 3 wellness checks in the past 18 months due to neighbor reports of screaming and suspected neglect. But no removals. No official action." Jackson's fists clenched at his sides. "No missing persons report?" he asked. "None filed. Not by him. Not by anyone." Jackson exhaled slowly, rage simmering beneath the surface. That man hadn't just abandoned them, he hadn't even looked back. Legally? Still listed as the custodial parent. But, with his criminal record and now abandonment, you'd qualify to file for emergency guardianship. If you're serious. Jackson turned, gazing toward the kitchen where the girls' laughter had just started to break through the silence. A tiny giggle, Lucy, probably. The sound twisted something inside his chest. "I'm very serious," he said. "Get me the paperwork." For the first time in his calculated life, Jackson wasn't preparing for a merger, a deal, or a hostile takeover. This was personal. This was war, for the hearts, safety, and future of 2 little girls who had already lost more than most adults could fathom. And Jackson Whitmore didn't lose what he chose to protect. For most of his adult life, Jackson Whitmore's 22,000 square foot mansion in Beverly Hills had existed as a statement, immaculate, pristine, silent. The kind of silence that echoed. The kind he used to confuse with peace. That silence didn't stand a chance against Lila and Lucy. It started small, a pair of muddy sneakers by the front door. Then came giggles from hallways that had never echoed with laughter. A trail of glitter down the stairs, Lucy's failed attempt at creating a sparkle trail for the fairy queen, her sister. Jackson stepped into his once formal dining room one morning to find the entire marble table converted into a makeshift art station. Finger paints, crayons, paper cutouts, glue. Everywhere. And in the center of it all were 2 beaming little girls in oversized aprons that dragged on the floor. He should have been irritated. He had a breakfast meeting scheduled in 30 minutes and his tie had just acquired a streak of purple paint. Instead, he laughed. It startled him, how natural that laugh felt. The transformation of his life was happening at breakneck speed. His calendar, once blocked into color-coded 30-minute meetings, now included things like bedtime stories, sibling mediation, over ice cream flavors, and stuffed animal emergency surgery, urgent. He was learning fast. By day 3, he'd memorized that Lila refused broccoli because it's basically trees, and Lucy would only drink milk from the red cup, not the blue one, unless the red one had been used for water first, in which case it was now contaminated forever. He mastered the complicated bedtime routine that involved not one but 3 stuffed animals, each with a personality, a nightlight check, and a retelling of the same story, with a different ending every time. Every night he sat by their bed, reading from worn books or making up tales about a lonely dragon who learned how to fly. And every night, he'd walk out of their room with their tiny voices trailing behind him, asking if he'd check the closet. Just in case. On the 4th night, Lucy fell asleep clutching his index finger. The sight hit him harder than any corporate victory ever had. But not every moment was tender. One rainy afternoon, Jackson entered the kitchen to find Lila in tears and Lucy hiding beneath the table. A quick investigation revealed the disaster: one had cut the other's paper crown. Harsh words had been exchanged. Feelings hurt. In the boardroom, Jackson commanded mergers. Here, he was helpless in the face of a crown crisis. Still, he knelt, listened, and didn't try to fix it with money or authority. He let them explain, helped them say sorry, and watched as Lucy offered a torn sticker to her sister as a peace offering. It wasn't about solving, it was about being there. One evening, he was on a video call with his Hong Kong partners when Lila burst into the room sobbing. "I dropped Bunny in the toilet," she wailed. Jackson, without a second of hesitation, excused himself from the $60 million deal and fetched rubber gloves. Mrs. Delaney, watching from the hallway, shook her head in amazement. Later that night, Jackson sat in his home office, hair slightly wet from bath time chaos, wearing a robe with princess stickers on the sleeve, and stared at his reflection in the darkened window. His eyes were tired, but softer. The house still echoed, but now, with life. He hadn't planned for any of this. He hadn't known how much he needed it. Unplanned. Untrained. Unequipped. But somewhere between grilled cheese dinners and stuffed animal negotiations, Jackson Whitmore had become something he never expected to be. A dad. The sun had barely risen over the hills of Beverly Hills when the first car pulled up across from Jackson Whitmore's estate. At first glance, it could have been a delivery driver or a landscaper. But when the man stepped out and raised a telephoto lens to the massive iron gates, Jackson's stomach sank. He was being watched. Inside the estate, the chaos of morning unfolded like it had for the past few weeks, Lila arguing over which socks matched, Lucy asking if peanut butter counted as breakfast protein, and Mrs. Delaney bustling about the kitchen with toast burning behind her. But Jackson couldn't shake the knot tightening in his chest. He stepped into his study, where James, his head of security, stood waiting, his expression grim. "We've confirmed it," James said, lowering his voice. "Private investigator. Not ours." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "Carter? Highly likely. And he's not just watching the house. He's been asking around, neighbors, staff, even your driver." "Of course he has," Jackson muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. "He couldn't beat me in business, so now he's trying to rip me apart personally." But Carter Lane wasn't just poking around. Within 24 hours, the attack became public. A headline appeared on a major financial news site: "Whitmore's child scandal, savior or strategist?" Accompanying the article was a grainy photo of Jackson ushering the twins into his Bentley, their faces half hidden, but still visible enough to spark speculation. The subtext was clear: this wasn't a heartwarming rescue. It was a stunt. A cold, calculated PR move to humanize the famously ruthless billionaire. The fallout was immediate. Investors called, concerned. Board members emailed, cautious. And worse, Child Protective Services reached out, referencing anonymous complaints about an improper guardianship arrangement. A preliminary home assessment was scheduled. The language was polite. The implication was not. That evening, Jackson stood at the edge of the twins' newly transformed playroom, watching them build a crooked tower of blocks and plastic animals. Lila was explaining how the tiger was a secret agent, while Lucy pretended the giraffe was a ballet teacher. They looked so normal. So safe. So unaware of the storm gathering just outside their bubble. His phone buzzed again, his lawyer. "They've expedited the process," the voice on the other end said grimly. "They'll be sending someone as early as tomorrow. Not just a case worker. A removal team." Jackson froze. "What are you talking about?" "Someone with judicial pull pushed this through fast. They have the right to remove the girls temporarily while they investigate." His blood ran cold. "That someone is Carter," Jackson said flatly. "Almost certainly." As he hung up, his breath shallow, he turned to find Lila standing in the doorway. Her big, curious eyes met his. "There are people outside with cameras," she said softly. "Lucy's scared." Jackson knelt in front of her, steadying his voice. "They can't come in. I promise. You're safe." "But, they're saying bad things about you," she whispered. "We saw it on the little TV in Mrs. Delaney's room." Behind her, Lucy peered around the corner, clinging to her stuffed unicorn. "Are they gonna take us away?" Jackson's heart cracked. "No," he said, voice low but firm. "No one is taking you away from me." But as he held their small hands, Jackson knew the battle ahead wouldn't be fought in boardrooms or behind closed doors. This time, it would be in public, under scrutiny, against a man with no limits. And the stakes weren't just his reputation. They were everything. The moment the courthouse inquiry was confirmed, something primal kicked in for Jackson Whitmore. The headlines, the camera flashes, the twisting of truth, all of it was spiraling beyond his control. And now, with the state sending a removal team to assess whether Lila and Lucy should stay with him, the word temporary loomed like a threat. He wouldn't let them be ripped away by bureaucrats and bad men hiding behind legalese. Not again. Not these girls. "We're not home if they're coming to take you," he said under his breath, pacing his study while speaking to his attorney on speakerphone. "Buy me 2 hours, just 2. I need to disappear with them. Somewhere they can't be touched." He didn't pack much. Essentials only. The girls didn't need their pink duffels or stuffed animals. They needed safety. And fast. Jackson moved like a man with a mission, cutting through his estate service corridor where James, his ever-loyal driver, waited beside a nondescript black sedan. Not the flashy sports car. Not the limo. Just a vehicle meant to blend in. The girls came down the stairs in coats far too big for their small frames, clutching their hands together. "Where are we going?" Lucy asked, her unicorn plushie tucked under her arm. "Somewhere no one can find us," Jackson said gently, buckling them into the back seat like a father on autopilot. They drove through winding backroads for hours, deep into the woods past Lake Arrowhead. The lake house came into view just as the sun was beginning to dip, golden light slanting through the towering pines. The house was modest, certainly compared to the Beverly Hills mansion, but serene. Built years ago for privacy, not luxury. Inside, the twins ran through the creaky wooden halls, their footsteps echoing as they explored rooms filled with old flannel blankets, bookshelves lined with dusty paperbacks, and the faint scent of cedar lingering in the walls. "This place smells like camping," Lila said, wrinkling her nose. "Because it is kind of like camping," Jackson replied with a tired smile. As the girls explored, Jackson made frantic calls, coordinating with his legal team. Their petition to block the removal was filed within the hour. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Monday, 2 days away. 2 days to breathe. 2 days to plan. 2 days to protect. Later, he found the girls outside sitting quietly on the old wooden dock, their feet dangling above the rippling surface of the lake. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was contemplative. As though they knew this was a pause between battles. "Are they going to take us away?" Lucy asked without looking at him. Jackson sat between them, stretching his long legs beside their tiny ones. "Some people are trying," he said honestly. "But I won't let them." "Why would they?" Lila pressed, her voice edged with anger. "We didn't do anything wrong. Because someone wants to hurt me, and he knows the best way to do that is by hurting you." Lucy looked up at him with wide, trembling eyes. "That's not fair." "No. It's not." Jackson felt the words burn in his throat. "But I promise you this, I will fight for you with everything I have. All of it. My money, my name, my whole heart. I'm not letting anyone take you away from me." Lila studied him for a long time, her gaze more grown-up than any 6-year-old's should be. "Nobody's ever fought for us before." The wind shifted over the lake, cool and steady. Jackson looked out at the horizon, the water now stained orange by the sinking sun. This was no longer about saving 2 abandoned children. This was about protecting the family he hadn't expected to find, the one he'd built not by blood, but by choice. And no force, no rival, no system, no ghost from the past, was going to tear it apart. The grand marble columns of the Los Angeles County Courthouse loomed like stone sentinels as Jackson Whitmore stepped from his black SUV, each step heavy with the weight of what was at stake. On either side of him, Lila and Lucy clung tightly to his hands. The twins, dressed in matching navy blue dresses and white shoes, looked like any other 6-year-olds on a special outing, except their wide, nervous eyes betrayed a deeper truth. This wasn't just any day. This was the day the world would decide if they got to stay together. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions like flares. "Mr. Whitmore. Are you using these girls for sympathy PR? Did you real find ISN?" Jackson ignored them. He kept his chin high, his grip firm, and his eyes on the double doors ahead. When one of the reporters called the girls staged props, Lucy flinched. Jackson gently squeezed her hand. "I've got you," he murmured, just loud enough for them to hear. Inside, the courtroom was cold in both temperature and tone. Cherrywood benches, polished floors, and stern expressions painted a scene more suited for corporate litigation than a custody hearing. But Jackson had faced hostile boardrooms. He had never been this afraid. On his left sat Dr. Charlotte Reeves, the child psychologist who had been working with the twins. On his right, the girls, Lila sitting up straight like a soldier, Lucy Moore curled in, Watchie Carter Lane smirked smugly beside the child services team. Jackson's stomach turned. The presiding judge, Judge Harmon, entered with solemnity, setting the tone for what would follow. The state began its case, presenting damning accusations. Photos of Jackson with the girls, taken out of context, were plastered on digital screens. A witness claimed Jackson had a pattern of using vulnerable individuals for business gain. Carter testified, weaving a story of an opportunistic billionaire grasping at emotional optics to salvage a failing merger. "I've known Jackson for 15 years, Carter said smoothly, never looking at the girls. He doesn't do anything that doesn't benefit him. These children appeared just as the Davis merger was collapsing. He needed a human angle. This was it." Jackson felt Lucy's hand grip his sleeve tighter. He placed his arm around both girls, shielding them, grounding them. Then came the turning point. Jackson's lawyer stood and began the cross-examination. "Mr. Lane, would you describe your relationship with Mr. Whitmore as friendly?" Carter shifted in his seat. Professional. With differences. Like when Mr. Whitmore outbid you for the Singapore contract. Carter blinked. Business happens. Did business also include hiring private investigators to follow Mr. Whitmore the night he found these girls? The room stirred. Because we have payment records. Dated that very evening. Gasps echoed. But it didn't stop there. A thumb drive was handed to the judge. On it, audio recordings of Carter and a former judge discussing how to remove the children to break Jackson's spirit and force a business concession. Judge Harmon's jaw clenched. These are serious allegations, Mr. Lane. Suddenly, the doors at the back creaked open. A man stumbled in, Travis Baird, the girl's biological father. Disheveled, uninvited, and clearly under the influence. "They're my kids," he shouted. "He stole them. After you threw them in a dumpster?" Jackson's attorney fired back. The courtroom fell to shocked silence. Then, Lila stood. Voice trembling but strong. "He left us there. Mr. Whitmore saved us." Lucy stood beside her. "He reads us stories. He makes us feel safe." Tears blurred Jackson's vision as he held them close. Judge Harmon cleared his throat. "Thank you, young ladies, for your bravery." 2 hours later, the ruling came down, temporary custody granted to Jackson Whitmore. Adoption proceedings to follow. Outside, as the first drops of rain fell, Lila wrapped her arms around Jackson's neck. "We're staying?" Jackson knelt, smiling through tears. "Forever." The adoption papers lay on Jackson Whitmore's mahogany desk, illuminated by the soft afternoon light pouring in through the window of his Beverly Hills study. 53 pages of legal language, formal, binding, permanent. Each word a step towards something he had never dared to believe he could truly have, a family. His pen hovered just above the signature line. His hand trembled. Not from fear of commitment, Jackson Whitmore had signed billion-dollar mergers with less hesitation. But this wasn't business. This wasn't numbers or negotiations or risk analysis. This was two little girls who trusted him, who had started to smile again, who called his mansion home and left their stuffed animals scattered across his spotless living room floor. This was Lila and Lucy. What if he wasn't enough? His father had walked out when he was 5. His mother had died soon after. The foster homes blurred together in his memory, some cruel, most indifferent. He had built his empire from nothing, a child no one had fought for, determined to never need anyone again. But now, looking at those names typed so neatly on the documents, Lila Grace Baird, Lucy Hope Baird, soon to be Whitmore, he questioned everything. A soft knock interrupted his spiral of doubt. "Mr. Whitmore?" Mrs. Delaney, his long-serving housekeeper, stood at the door, arms crossed but face gentle. "The girls are waiting. You promised to read chapter 7. The dragon's about to try flying again." Jackson looked up, startled. "It's that late already?" She nodded, then glanced at the paperwork. "Having second thoughts?" "Not about wanting them," he said quietly, staring down at the forms. "About deserving them." Mrs. Delaney stepped into the room, her voice firm but warm. "Sir, I've worked for you 12 years. Never once have I seen you miss a meeting or forget a name. But I have seen you learn to braid hair, memorize which vegetables they won't touch, and sing off-key during thunderstorms. I'd say that makes you more than deserving." As she left, Jackson let her words settle. Before he could rise, 2 small voices whispered just outside the door. "You ask him." "No, you." Then, in unison, 1, 2. The door creaked open. There they were, in matching butterfly pajamas, hair still damp from their bath. Lila clutched her stuffed unicorn. Lucy held their chapter book. "You promised," Lila said sternly. The dragon was just about to fly. Jackson smiled and stood, the papers still unsigned on the desk. "You're right. I'm sorry I'm late." Lucy's sharp eyes caught sight of the forms. "What are those?" Jackson paused. He wasn't going to lie. "They're adoption papers. If I sign them, it makes me your legal dad. Not just someone who looks after you, but your real father. Forever." The twins looked at each other, one of their silent conversations. "Would we have to change our names?" Lila asked softly. "Only if you want to." Lucy stepped closer, her eyes narrowed in that intuitive way she had. "Do you want to be our dad? For real?" Jackson dropped to one knee, now at their level. His voice was low, steady. "More than anything I've ever wanted. But only if you want me to be." Lila's eyes shimmered. "I already call you Dad, in my head sometimes." "Me too," Lucy whispered. "I just didn't know if it was okay." Jackson felt his throat close. He pulled them into a hug, their small arms wrapping around his neck. "Then I better go sign those papers," he whispered. After Chapter 7, Lucy corrected, trying to keep her voice stern, though her smile broke through. "Deal." That night, as they read together under the soft glow of their nightlight, Jackson knew he'd never sign anything more important than those papers. Because this time, he wasn't acquiring. He was belonging. He wasn't saving anyone. He was finally being saved. For the first time in its existence, the Whitmore estate felt alive. The cold marble floors, once silent beneath the polished shoes of visiting dignitaries and business moguls, now echoed with the hurried footsteps of twin 6-year-olds, Lila and Lucy, racing through the halls in mismatched socks. Crayons rolled under century-old credenzas, and colorful drawings began appearing on walls once reserved for abstract art and high-end decor. Jackson Whitmore, the billionaire once known for precision and control, now found himself learning the names of children's book characters, memorizing snack preferences, and quietly enjoying the chaos that had become his new normal. He had transformed. The formal dining room, once a cold monument to wealth and status, had been stripped of its crystal centerpieces and replaced with easels, drawing tables, and drying racks. When Jackson first proposed the idea of turning it into an art studio, his interior designer had nearly fainted. "This is where you hosted the Secretary of the Treasury," she reminded him. He didn't flinch. "Now I host two artists who make better memories." It wasn't just the decor that changed. Jackson had begun adapting his empire around his daughters. Calls were shorter, meetings rescheduled, and his schedule, once jammed with power moves and investor calls, now carved out space for tea parties, puppet shows, and ballet rehearsals. On a crisp Friday afternoon, Jackson conducted a video board meeting from his home office, halfway listening to quarterly earnings while watching the clock tick toward 3:15 p.m., the exact moment Lila and Lucy would return from their first full week at Westridge Academy. The moment the front doors burst open, he excused himself from the call. "Gentlemen, we'll have to move faster, I have a prior engagement," he said, standing and removing a glitter sticker that had somehow affixed itself to his lapel. Downstairs, the girls were already in the kitchen, school uniforms rumpled, cheeks flushed from excitement. "Dad!" Madison, "No, Lucy," Jackson reminded himself, ran straight toward him, cradling a clay sculpture. "Look what I made." It was a lumpy but earnest recreation of the three of them, one tall figure, two small, their clay hands joined in a circle. The heads were lopsided, and the colors were off, but Jackson felt his throat tighten. "It's us," she said proudly, then added, "I even put your glasses on right." Lila, ever the more serious one, pulled a folder from her backpack. "I got selected for the science symposium," she said matter-of-factly. "My water filtration project was the best in the class." Jackson looked at her, stunned. He crouched to her level. "Lila, that's amazing. I'm proud of you." "We should celebrate," Lucy said. Pizza and a movie? Jackson hesitated. It was a far cry from his usual Friday night routine of closing international deals or reviewing portfolios, but this was his new world. Absolutely, he said. Let's do pizza in the movie room. Once, that room had been a private library, a quiet retreat filled with first editions and market strategy volumes. Now it held beanbags, a projector, shelves of children's books, and a worn copy of Frozen 2. Later that night, as Jackson sat between the girls, a pizza slice in one hand and Lucy's head resting gently on his shoulder, he looked around at the mess, pillows everywhere, a crayon stuck to his sock, a juice box overturned on the rug, and felt something deep in his chest. Peace. Lila snuggled in from the other side, whispering, "This is the best Friday ever." Jackson looked down at the two tiny people who had stormed into his life like a hurricane and turned it upside down. He smiled. This is what home's supposed to feel like. Saturday mornings had become sacred in the Whitmore household, a time of laughter, pancakes, and arguments over who got to pour the syrup. But this morning, that peace shattered. Jackson Whitmore was flipping pancakes while Lucy sang off-key beside him, wearing his oversized sunglasses and pretending to be a movie star. Lila was at the kitchen table, drawing constellations with the precision of a budding scientist. Mrs. Delaney hummed softly while cleaning nearby. Then the doorbell rang. Mrs. Delaney answered it, and within seconds her tone changed. "Mr. Whitmore," she called, urgency in her voice, "there's someone here, he insists on seeing the girls." Jackson's smile faded. He placed the spatula down gently and stepped into the foyer. There, standing in his polished entryway, wearing wrinkled jeans and a weathered bomber jacket, was Travis Baird, the girl's biological father. He looked sober, but rough around the edges, as if sobriety had only just begun smoothing out years of chaos. "There's my girls," Travis said with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. The twins froze behind Jackson. Lucy clutched the back of his leg, her fingers trembling. Lila's shoulders tightened, her hand slipping into her sister's. Jackson moved to shield them, keeping his tone even. "This is not appropriate. Any visitation must be arranged through the courts." "I finished my program," Travis said, holding up a folded certificate like a get-out-of-jail-free card. 30 days sober. That earns me visitation rights. The court agrees. Jackson clenched his jaw. "That's for the judge to decide, in court. You need to leave before I call security." Travis stepped closer, his voice darkening. "You think you can just buy my kids? They're mine, by blood." Lucy whimpered softly. Jackson felt the familiar fire rise in his chest, but before he could speak, a small voice broke through the tension. "You left us in the garbage," Lila said firmly, stepping forward, her voice small but unwavering. "Dad rescued us." Travis's eyes narrowed at the word dad. "I'm your father," he snapped. "Not this rich guy playing house." "No," Lucy said suddenly, stepping beside her sister. Her voice shook, but her eyes were clear. "A real dad doesn't forget to feed us. Or leave us all night. A real dad reads stories and makes hot chocolate and goes to school plays." Jackson knelt beside the girls, placing his hands gently on their shoulders. "Mr. Baird, I understand you've taken a step in the right direction, and that's commendable. But if you care at all about these girls' well-being, you'll respect the legal process, and their fear right now." For a moment, something flickered in Travis's eyes. Not defiance, something quieter. Maybe shame. "They look happy," he muttered, voice cracking slightly. "Didn't look like that with me." "They are happy," Lila replied softly, without hesitation. Travis exhaled, the tension in his shoulders sagging. He looked down, suddenly looking older than his age. "Truth is, I came here thinking maybe you'd pay to make me disappear. Money, you know." Jackson didn't blink. "If what you want is truly about them, then we can talk." Supervised visitation, eventually. Continued financial support, for your recovery. But only if you put their needs first. Not yours. Travis looked back at the twins, who stared at him not with anger, but something worse, pity. They look at you like you're their world. I am, Jackson said simply. I see that now, Travis whispered. He turned toward the door. I'll have my lawyer call yours. After he left, Jackson pulled the twins into his arms. Are you okay? He whispered. Lucy nodded against his chest. You didn't let him take us. No one ever will, Jackson promised, holding them tighter than ever. Not ever. The courthouse looked different that morning, warmer, somehow. The early sun splashed gold across its marble steps as Jackson Whitmore stepped out of his black town car and adjusted the headbands on Lila and Lucy one last time. His normally steady hands fumbled, betraying the storm of emotions he kept buried beneath his tailored suit. You're fussing again, Dad, Lucy giggled, batting his hand away. I just want everything to be perfect, he murmured, brushing a rogue curl behind her ear. Mackenzie, always the pragmatic one, checked her tiny pink wristwatch. We should go in. The judge will see us in exactly 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Jackson took a deep breath, the kind that felt like it reached down into his very soul. 12 minutes until this fragile, beautiful dream became real. 12 minutes until he stopped being just their rescuer, and became their father. The heavy front doors opened, and inside, the unexpected awaited. Not just court officials, but a crowd of people who had quietly become their circle, Mrs. Delaney dabbing tears with a handkerchief, Charlotte Winters their gentle psychologist standing proudly, teachers from Westridge Academy, and Jackson's entire executive board, most of whom now scheduled meetings around school plays and ballet recitals. In the back of the courtroom, Jackson noticed a familiar figure, Travis Baird, sober now, wearing a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit. His presence sent a ripple through the twins, but neither panicked. They simply clung tighter to Jackson's hands. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Harmon entered. The judge, usually all business, allowed the faintest smile at the sight of the girls in their matching blue dresses. Today, he said, is not just a legal formality. It's a recognition of something that's already true. The proceedings moved quickly. Documents were signed. Questions were answered. Promises were made. Then came the moment Jackson had played over 1,000 times in his head. Mr. Whitmore, the judge said, do you understand that by adopting Lila Grace and Lucy Hope, you are creating a legal, permanent parental relationship, one that cannot be undone or taken lightly? Jackson swallowed hard, his voice low but firm. I do, Your Honor. There is nothing I want more. The judge turned to the twins. And you girls, do you understand what adoption means? Lila nodded eagerly. It means Alex will be our dad forever. Not just because he wants to, but because the law says so too. And it means we're a real family, Lucy added, her voice steady, with papers to prove it. Judge Harmon smiled. Then by the power vested in me by the state of California, I hereby declare that these children shall from this day forward be known as Lila Grace Whitmore and Lucy Hope Whitmore, with all the rights and privileges that name carries. He brought the gavel down with a single, resonant bang. Tears filled Jackson's eyes as he dropped to one knee and wrapped his arms around both girls. He didn't care that the cameras flashed or that the courtroom fell silent around them. In that moment, they were the only three people in the world. We have something for you, Lucy whispered, reaching into her small floral purse. Lila nodded, suddenly shy. We made it ourselves. They handed him a simple wooden frame, containing 3 handprints in paint, 1 large, 2 small. Below, in uneven but careful handwriting, were the words. Family isn't about who you came from. It's about who you belong to. Jackson stared at the gift, heart clenching. It's perfect, he whispered, his voice catching in his throat. Outside, as reporters captured the embrace, Travis approached slowly. "They look happy," he said, his voice clearer than it had been in months. "Happier than they ever were with me." "You'll always be part of their story," Jackson said gently, "but thank you for letting me be part of their future." Travis hesitated. "Take care of them." "With everything I have," Jackson promised. And this time, he meant it not just with words, but with every part of himself. Sunlight poured through the wide bay windows of the Whitmore estate, casting golden warmth over the breakfast nook where Jackson sat reviewing summer camp brochures. The once sterile, immaculate kitchen now bore signs of childhood: mismatched cereal bowls, doodled napkins, a glittery paper crown abandoned beside the fruit basket. Jackson smiled faintly as the scent of pancakes wafted in from the stovetop, courtesy of Mrs. Delaney, humming softly in the background. Across from him sat Lila and Lucy, deep in debate. "I want to go to science camp," Lila announced, poking her spoon into a bowl of oatmeal decorated with blueberries shaped like a solar system. "But drama camp has a real stage," Lucy countered, flipping through a brochure. "And costumes. And singing." "You like singing?" "Not in front of people," Lila muttered. Jackson leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, captivated by their banter. Just a few months ago, these girls had trembled under his roof like strangers in a castle. Now, they argued over summer plans like any sisters would, safe, confident, and completely at home. "Maybe," he offered, "we could alternate weeks. Or even do different camps, if that's what you each want." The twins exchanged a look, one of their silent conversations that always seemed to happen in the blink of an eye. Lucy raised an eyebrow. Lila shrugged. Finally, Lucy nodded. "We don't have to do everything together," Lila said. "Right?" "That's right," Jackson replied, hiding the lump in his throat. "You're each your own person." The doorbell rang, unusual for a Saturday morning. Mrs. Delaney appeared moments later, her expression tight. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice low, "there's someone at the door. He's insisting on seeing the girls." Jackson's heart skipped. He stood immediately. "Who is it?" Before she could answer, Travis Baird, clean-shaven, sober, but still a man who wore guilt like a second skin, stepped into the dining room uninvited. "There's my girls," he said with a forced smile. "Hi, sweethearts." Lila's spoon dropped with a clatter. Lucy instinctively scooted closer to her sister. Jackson stepped between them, his jaw set. "This isn't the time or place, Mr. Baird," he said coolly. "You know the agreement. All visitation must go through the court." "I completed my program," Travis said, waving a crumpled certificate. 30 days clean. I got rights now. Court said I could see them." "You barged into their home," Jackson replied, voice dangerously calm. "You're frightening them." Travis's smile faded. "You think you can just buy my kids? They're mine." "No," Lila's voice rang out. She stood, her small hands clenched. "You left us in the trash. He saved us." Lucy stood beside her, tears shimmering in her eyes. "A real dad reads bedtime stories. He makes pancakes. He stays." Jackson gently placed a hand on each of their shoulders, his voice quiet but firm. "If you truly care about them, you'll respect the legal process." Travis looked at the twins again. Something flickered in his eyes, shame, perhaps. Or regret. His shoulders slumped. "I didn't come for a fight," he mumbled. I thought maybe you'd pay to make me go away." The girls stared, silent. Jackson nodded slowly. "Then let's talk. But not here. And not like this. They've been through enough." After Travis agreed to meet with Jackson's lawyers later that week, he left without further protest. As the door closed, Jackson knelt before the girls. "Are you okay?" Lucy nodded, clinging to him. You didn't let him take us. No one ever will, Jackson whispered, pulling them into his arms. You're home now. And I will fight for that, for you, every single day. In that moment, as two trembling voices whispered, "We love you, Dad," Jackson realized he hadn't just saved them. They had saved him, too. Later that night, Jackson stood outside the twins' bedroom, listening to their soft, even breaths. The house was quiet, but his heart was full, fuller than it had ever been. He walked to his study, opened the old wooden box where he kept his most treasured memories, and gently placed inside a new photo, him with Lila and Lucy, their smiles radiant beneath a hand-painted banner that read "Forever." We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 1 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.